Very warm welcome to OmniFocus and Obsidian Workflows with Leah Ferguson. And I'm really grateful to Leah for being here today. And she's an expert on both of these apps and is going to be talking a lot about how these two apps can coexist to really complement each other in a very productive way. So I'm really excited to hear what she has to share today. And I'm sure I'll learn a lot today as will all of you. Just a little bit about Learn OmniFocus. If you're new to this membership community, it started way back in June of 2014, shortly after OmniFocus 2 came out, and now we're getting ready for OmniFocus 4. So there's definitely been a lot of evolution in OmniFocus over the years. And my intention from the beginning has been to support people in living a fulfilling and productive life with some help from OmniFocus. And you'll see in brackets it says in complementary productivity apps. So OmniFocus does what it does very well, and there's a whole kind of constellation of apps that help to support OmniFocus and you and your personal productivity as well. So we'll be taking a deep dive into Obsidian as one of those complementary apps today. And generally speaking, there's three main areas that I focus on in the site. First of all is structuring your OmniFocus setup so that it is equipped to handle the things that show up on your plate and to help you move things forward, projects and repeating actions and so forth. And then there's developing the habits around using OmniFocus. You could have a beautiful OmniFocus setup, but if you're not in the habit of using it, then it's not going to serve any purpose. It's not going to help you accomplish things in your life. So I put a lot of emphasis on the workflows as well. And then the third part is to optimize things. So you might be using some shortcuts automation or maybe some of the OmniFocus plugins, things that allow you to use OmniFocus more efficiently so you can spend more time doing the things within OmniFocus and less time actually fiddling with OmniFocus. So the first two are usually what comes first, but then as you get to be more advanced, starting to bring in some of those optimizations. And OmniFocus Live is a component of Learn OmniFocus that I've been leading pretty much since the beginning. And Learn OmniFocus Live essentially has four themes, four components to it. So I talk a lot about the soft skills of productivity because using OmniFocus and learning all the features is not going to make much of a difference if you don't have a handle on productivity methodologies, things like getting things done. I've done one on my own holistic productivity approach. So I really emphasize the soft skills and how they can be applied with the wonderful technology that we have at our fingertips. I also feature apps regularly and show how they can be used alongside OmniFocus. We have workflow guests, just as we have Leah here today, that really demonstrates how OmniFocus and other apps can be used out in the wild, how they can really have a big impact in a way that's not just kind of an idealized form of productivity. These are the apps being used to solve real problems and to make progress on projects large and small. And then lastly, one of my favorite parts of Learn OmniFocus is the interactive group sessions. And these consist of the small group office hours, and more recently, we've got virtual co-working, so you can come and work alongside other Learn OmniFocus members. So just a little taste of what's new, some things that have been introduced recently, and a little taste of what's coming down the pike. So first of all, there's a few more office hour sessions this year. There's one more in November and there's two in December. And these are limited to 10 people. They're purposely not recorded. We ask that everything be kept confidential. And they're a great place to meet other OmniFocus users, to ask questions, to have discussions. And I welcome you to come to these sessions, whether you started using OmniFocus a month ago or if you have been using it since version 1. It's a very supportive community. And I think you'll find it's a great source of motivation. And as I mentioned, more recently, I started offering these virtual co-working sessions. And it's quite magical, really, what happens when people come together with an intention of making progress on things that are important to them and doing some good focused work together. And there's also a social component to these as well. There's a kind of a feeling of camaraderie as you do whatever's on your OmniFocus list. So there's 3 25-minute focus blocks. So this is when you're doing whatever you choose to focus on. Maybe there's some things that you find you don't put aside time for, and this is a perfect place to come and give those some attention. And at the beginning of our session, we get a chance to kind of get to know each other. You'll work within a small group during these sessions so you can meet the people in your group and set some intentions for your focus sessions. We do check-ins in between the focus sessions, and at the end is an opportunity to congratulate yourself for what you did, to acknowledge what worked and what didn't work, and to take that learning into work you're doing either in future virtual co-working sessions or even just focus work that you're doing on your own. And to add a little social component as well, you're welcome to arrive 10 minutes early and stick around for 10 minutes after the 90 minutes just to kind of hang out and get to know some of the wonderful people in our international community. So you can learn more about those at learnomnifocus.com/VC for virtual co-working. And there's 4 more of these this year. There's 1 more in November and 3 in December. And I try to vary the times to accommodate people in as many different time zones as possible. I just want to mention briefly too, I'm a big fan of the Setup. It's a subscription-based service that gives you access to a wide range of apps. These are some of the ones that I've featured that I find are particularly useful alongside OmniFocus. And the recent addition is one that I've featured extensively on Learn OmniFocus, which is Hookmark. It used to be called Hook, but the name recently changed to Hookmark. And I'm really happy to see that one's been added to the Setup subscription. OmniFocus 4, I imagine some of you are already using. This is the next major release of OmniFocus, and it's being rewritten using something called Swift UI, which is going to make it much easier in the future for the Omni group to bring feature parity across all the different platforms. And especially with OmniFocus 4.0, the iPad and iPhone apps are taking a major leap forward and gaining the features that have been Mac only for many years. So it's really exciting to see this continuing to evolve, and you can get in on the test flight if you want to start using it before the official release. But they're certainly well on their way to having a release product. So I'll be continuing to provide updates on Learn OmniFocus. And then I'm planning to have some new OmniFocus 4 content ready to share very soon after OmniFocus 4 officially drops. Something that I have been doing for years now is each November donating a portion of the proceeds to a charity, and I've chosen a different charity every year as part of giving back to the international community and really supporting the great work that these charities are doing all over the world. And the one that I'm going to be supporting on behalf of Learn OmniFocus this year is called Farm Radio International. And I have a good friend who worked there for many years. When I was in Kenya, I got to meet the executive director, and I was just really impressed with the work that they're doing. So I'm really happy to be shining the spotlight on them and giving a donation on behalf of the Learn OmniFocus community based on the November memberships. And essentially their approach is very powerful but very simple, and they notice that there's real potential for farmers in Africa to increase the yield of their crops and have a huge difference through their community if they're educated on best practices around growing. Even relatively simple change to the way they grow things can have a profound impact. So I'll be featuring on social media some of the great work that they're doing. So keep an eye out for that. And if you do want to read more about Farm Radio, you can go to farmradio.org. So I definitely invite you to check out the amazing, innovative work that they're doing, and essentially helping farmers be more productive and using both kind of technology that's been around for a long time as well as some newer technology to really help to educate and communicate throughout Africa. Okay, and without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Leah Ferguson, who's joining us today from the Toronto area. So if you're not quite sure where Toronto is, that'll give you a taste of where it's located within Canada, a few time zones over from me. And I first learned of Leah when she was a guest on the Omni Show. In general, if you don't listen to the Omni Show, I highly recommend adding that to your podcast player. There's a lot of really interesting people who were interviewed on the show and talk about how they use Omni's products. And in particular, I recommend listening to Leah's interview from earlier this year for episode 99. And Leah's going to talk about 2 purple productivity apps today. And you'll notice her purple background when she comes along as well. So there's definitely a purple theme coming on. So on the left side, I'm sure you recognize that app. It's OmniFocus. On the right side, maybe an app that you're not familiar with. That's Obsidian. And if you're not sure what Obsidian is, well, first of all, it's a stone that's made from hot lava, I think cooling very quickly. It crystallizes and creates the stone. And it's also a productivity app. You can learn more at obsidian.md. And it basically allows you to take a folder with text-based Markdown files into it and create a whole database and cross-link things together. And I'm sure Leah will be talking about that in detail. But the beauty of Obsidian is you can just take a bunch of text files and instantly start to use them and create links between them. There's a very sort of easy entry point to that point. And as we'll see, Obsidian can also be extended. And I think there's well over 700 plugins that are available for it. So it can be used in a very simple way and then also in a very elaborate way. And we'll see some examples of that as Leah takes us through her system today. I also recommend checking out Leah's website where she talks about her design work. That's at leahferguson.com. And you can follow her on Twitter at Leah the Designer. All right, at this point, it's my pleasure to pass it over to you, Leah. So take it away.
I'm really excited to be able to talk with everyone today about OmniFocus and Obsidian, 2 apps that I'm overly passionate about and use basically every day to run my life. First off, okay, who the heck am I and why am I going to be talking to you today? So, hi, I'm Leah Ferguson. I am an experiential graphic designer, which is a fancy way of saying I help to design the space around you so that you can find your way through it, as well as really enjoy your experience in it as well. It's a mix of wayfinding, like signs, and being able to create cues in your environment, as well as doing branded environments and large-scale graphics. And sometimes those tech offices you see photos of and go, okay, that's really cool. I want to work there. So I am a classically trained as a graphic designer, but my very first job when I graduated from university, I basically tripped and fell into this little thing called wayfinding. And from there, it's become, frankly, a passion of mine, just because it's so integrated into everything we do in and around our world. And I'm using this example of 5 ways that we identify our spaces around us, because I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of how we also start to think about like task management and how we start to recognize, knowledge and notes in the way we start to track things. This is from a book, actually the first time wayfinding was used as a term by Kevin Lynch in the 1960s. And so, I kind of like always talking about, hey, we've got like these districts of groups of tasks that we're working on, or groups of notes, these paths, these journeys through our systems. And I just think it's kind of a nice way of like kind of introducing, this is the chaos that I actually do. Like I go through information architecture and do deep dives into regulation and thinking about, how you actually get through space so that you just experience, a calm, simple environment. And just like, as you're working through your OmniFocus or your Obsidian or anything you're doing, a lot of it is making sure you've got the right information at the right time, but also not having too much information, because that can lead to overwhelm. Speaking of overwhelm, a little bit of my history in terms of these apps. I've actually been using OmniFocus since 2010. I started keeping logs and track of like starting to write notes, really notably in like 1998, using Microsoft Word. I remember I used to create essentially like my grade school notes. I'd go home and I'd type them up and do illustrations like a textbook. And so, my obsession with how do you design information kind of started very young. But, I've worked my way through into different tools. And I think you'll see like the most significant thing is kind of this big schism that happened in 2021 for me, where I dropped the green elephant, which if you use Evernote, you know that yesterday was kind of a big day of Evernote was sold to another company. So it's kind of bittersweet to talk about leaving Evernote today. But most importantly for what we're talking about here, you'll see the introduction of a new app, Obsidian, in 2021 for me, as well as my continued use of OmniFocus. So I want to talk about the whole idea about one app to rule them all, because quite often when I'm talking with people, I should note, I'm also a moderator in the Obsidian community on the Discord. We've got about, I think, 75,000 people there now who come in and chat regularly about Obsidian. So when I'm saying, hey, I talk to a lot of people, I talk to a lot of people. And people will come in and go, okay, I just want that one app to rule them all. I don't want to have to, I just want that one space. And that's cool. If that's what you want to do, that's great. But I am a big fan of using the right tool for the job. And so that's why, I could probably rebuild OmniFocus in Obsidian, but I really don't want to, because, I've been using OmniFocus now for 12 years. And I like using the dedicated space so that I can plan and work accordingly and having the right context for different things. So I am a fan of using, different tools for different purposes. And so I'm going to talk today a lot about mainly these big two, Obsidian and OmniFocus, because that's where, I track my tasks, what I actually, what I need to do or what I'd like to do in OmniFocus. But I also do some light tracking in Obsidian. But where it's really kind of cool is how the two will work together. And then reminders, because, your grocery list, if it's in your OmniFocus, cool. I tried that. It got really overwhelming when I gave it a due date. And suddenly, I had 25 additional tasks because I needed to remember to go pick up eggs. So I'm a big fan of having your separate space for the different things. Some of the other tools that I do use that kind of, they're task and note adjacent. I'll just kind of, mention them here because I do get asked this a lot. DevonThink is, OmniFocus is where my content goes and where my thought or my notes about what I'm reading and writing go. DevonThink is a fantastic reference manager and, kind of a file manager and fantastic search tool. But that's where I keep my PDFs and my owner operator manuals and my receipts and things that I need to go reference, but I don't necessarily need in my everyday stream. Readwise is my task for I used to use Evernote for literally everything. I would dump articles in there to read. Now I use, a dedicated tool, the right tool for the job. And in this case, for me, it's an app called Readwise. Shortcuts, we'll get there. And then Drafts is another one that's been kind of a critical tool in my system that I consider to be passive because it's always working there under the surface for me. But, some people will use it as a tool actively to put things into OmniFocus or Obsidian. I just wanted to kind of give lay of the land, what I do. So let's jump into the magic, AKA let's talk about the tools. In terms of my Obsidian Vault, this is kind of a best way to put it is I like to be able to have broad systems that work across everything. So for instance, and I use a system called Johnny Decimal. And Johnny Decimal is the idea about, at its most simplest, it's having, the right amount of information visible at the right time. And so you'll see in my sidebar here, where I've got, kind of buckets of content. And the idea is like you have no more than 10 folders at a time. So for me, like I chunk out my life. I've got, my area of like my personal things, or I've got my area of learning. I'm just finishing my master's degree, so that's a pretty big bucket for me. I've got professional, which is my work life, both in terms of like my 9 to 5 job, but then a lot of my professional development and my volunteer work otherwise outside there. And so like the whole idea for me is I start to create these areas where, like, for instance, in professional, when you kind of pare down, you go, all right, so breaking that down to the next level, it's career administration, my website, my blog, the company I work for, public speaking. And so like, instead of having, 100 folders in my sidebar, which again, when we talk about overwhelm, that's one of those things, I have, these kind of clean, clear numbers. Where that kind of translates into other parts of my system is, you'll notice I've got these same numbers happening. Whoop, come on, work with me here. I've got these same numbers happening in my OmniFocus, where I like to, be able to jump into my workspace. So I've got, 35 is the company I work for. 30 is kind of a big bucket for everything that I'm talking about professional. And so you start to get those relationships happening between things. And that's just kind of at like the overview level, because that sort of thing, starts to live also in my calendar. I use a calendar called Fantastical because I really like how you can have different views. All the information is there, but I don't want to see it all at the same time. But for instance, I might want to see, everything in my professional sphere or my personal sphere, because, when you're done work, maybe you want to be able to turn work off and just focus on your personal things. And so, for instance, like there's that, and like it extends even through to my Finder, how I name my files. Again, you'll see where, okay, these top buckets are there. Same for something like my Dev and Think, where I will have, whole databases that start to use that number. And it's just creating kind of a map of my tasks, my files. I know that if it's 10 or anything that between 10 and 19, that's something in my personal life. It's kind of like it's being able to have just that clear area or links between different apps. In terms of next steps of how I work, I was mentioning before this talk how when I left Evernote, I had 19,000 notes and I had, I kid you not, 1,000 tags. That's a lot of tags. And it got to the point where at the end of it, I couldn't find anything, or I'd have duplicate tags. And so now, having learned from that, I'm very strategic with my tags use, both in or in Obsidian. I keep, kind of a very clear list. I call it my little, it's my user guide for me. It's my standard operating procedure. And all of my tags, boil down to these, dozen tags, where I've got, let's see if I can make that even bigger, where I kind of go through and I, define, is it an active tag? Is there content that I need to work with here or act on or do something, versus a passive tag where it's good, it's got information and I'm able to find it quickly or use a automation tool in some way to be able to act on it in the background, but it's not something that I physically, need to use. Versus how I do tagging in OmniFocus. And I do keep, I literally keep a note to myself. Here's the tags you use. And so you remember why you chose them. And sometimes, it's learning from your painful mistakes of, I had 1,000 tags and I don't want to do that again. And so talking through my tags is I want to be very strategic about how I apply them to my information. In OmniFocus, I'm a fan of having, again, it's how do you start how do you want to find that information again? I like being able to have, forecast tags because it was something I want to make sure for sure that it shows up in my forecast. I will tag it. It's important enough that it doesn't matter if it doesn't have a due date, it's going to go into my forecast. If it's something that, relates to another person, I want to be able to, have a tag, a task, or something that I want to be able to talk to my boss about. And I don't want to waste their time by talking to them like 10 different times with sporadic things. If I'm having a conversation with them, I pull up my tag, my boss tag, their name. And I've got, my status update across all of my projects or a question that I had for them. I will also use place tags. And OmniFocus is really nice where it's got the geolocation. And so if I'm, I work in a hybrid office, which, a lot of people do now, that's kind of the world we're in. There are certain things that I can only do at the office. And I like being able to, regardless of if it's, work or personal or whatever the case may be, I like being able to pull up, I'm physically here at the office. What do I need to do today? And it's, again, anything that I'm tagging, it's super quick as I'm setting up a note. But more importantly, it's something that I want to be able to use or that is going to be able to help me pare down information. I'll talk about this as well in terms of views in Obsidian. You can use Obsidian for absolutely anything. It's a fantastic tool where you can just, do a complete brain dump of like, are you working on a blog post? Are you working on a thesis? Are you reading a book and you want to take some interesting quotes or reactions to them? Do you want to track your Dungeons and Dragons campaign? That is a thing I do. But the thing is, if you're just putting content in and not thinking about how you want to retrieve it, it makes me ask the question, why are you putting the content in? Because half the reason we take notes on something is because we want to be able to surface them at a later time. It's the discoverability. It's the same way if we're designing an environment. If we're going to design something really cool, but then create no signs to be able to get you there, then it's great that you've built this environment, but if no one's going to be able to find it, discover it, then why are we spending the time, the money, the effort to do this? And so again, that's kind of the approach I'll take to my notes, my OmniFocus. But I want to talk about a specific plugin in Obsidian. Obsidian, you can use it just fresh out of the box, version 1.0, how it's been designed by the developers. Because at the end of the day, you're able to go through, you're literally looking at my notes for this talk while I'm giving it. And I've gone through and I've got links. If I want to be able to talk about shortcuts, I've got all my notes there quickly linked in my outline as I'm going. But you can also extend it with plugins. And I want to be very careful that I'm not talking about too many plugins, because again, that can be its own, and it is its own video. But the one I want to talk, because I think it's something that is going to be very useful to the OmniFocus and Obsidian, like that beautiful Venn diagram of us using it all together, is Shortcut Launcher. And Shortcut Launcher is a way to be able to launch and act on information in Obsidian using Apple shortcuts. It was put out by Mac Stories. And what it allows you to do is, just like if you're creating a shortcut, you're able to kind of set variables that then Apple shortcuts can kind of work its magic and start to connect the two between each other. So how this works is, well, let's actually do one. If you're going through and you're working on a note, well, for instance, I'll keep notes on meetings. And I'll go through and I'll set up, I've got a template that, I've got my meeting note template. I'll say, okay, here's a meeting that we're going to have. I know that I'm going to have actions to do in OmniFocus after the fact. I want to be able to create a task in OmniFocus. So I'll go through and using the command palette in Obsidian, I will go, all right, I want to launch my shortcut, Obsidian to OmniFocus. And so this, I've hit enter. It doesn't look that interesting because, well, nothing on screen has happened. But let's go over to OmniFocus. And sitting in my inbox is, a new task that wasn't there before that's named the same thing as my note. And importantly, it's got, I love when I do a live demo and it doesn't work. That's cool. It's supposed to have the direct link back to the note. This is why we do live things, folks. So let me try my other one where we select information. And the idea is, hey, I want to be able to have, here's notes that I need to act on that are actually going to really help me in my OmniFocus note. I'm going to select it. I'm going to cross my fingers. Hey, it worked. Okay, cool. I only have one to fix. So it's got down here, what it's got now is it's got a link back to that note that I had open in OmniFocus. But more importantly, it's actually gone through and pulled out, for instance, questions that I might have that I want to be able to reference in OmniFocus, or a blurb of, like, say, an email that I've archived in here. And it's got it now where I've got that information automatically with just the touch of a button in my OmniFocus. Also, I will say 2 tools that are both purple that start with O are really problematic for when you're trying to be able to talk about them both at the same time. Anyway, so in terms of like my workflows, I use OmniFocus and Obsidian together for content creation, yes, but my big thing is, how do I plan my day? How do I capture my day? And be able to kind of go through and log everything together. When I'm starting my day and starting my day in both OmniFocus and Obsidian, I will sit down and I will plan out, okay, what do I have on my calendar today? Like, what are the big ticket items that I've got on my plate today? And so I'll start this by literally creating a note. And well, I'll open up my daily note. But for argument's sake, I'm going to show you using Templater. Just open up. Oh, one of the reasons why it's also really helpful to use Johnny Decimal is, for instance, I'm doing a quick search into my templates. And I know that all of my templates are under the 03 folder. And so very quickly, I've been able to parse down, I've got 4,000 notes in Obsidian. I'm able to open the right one. So what I've got is a template here, and it has all the content automatically when I create that note in the morning for my day. So I will deploy it here. Here's a fresh note, brand new from the template. It's my daily log for today, and I'm starting fresh. And I'll go through, and I've got a shortcut that I didn't sanitize for this meeting or for this presentation, so I'm not going to show it. But what I'll say is, it winds up looking something like this, where it's using an Apple shortcut to copy my calendar information to my clipboard, so that as I'm sitting, I don't have to necessarily open my calendar. I know, okay, here's all my meetings for the day. Here's everything on my calendar. So I'm planning my day. I'm also going through, and I've got my OmniFocus open. What are the big tasks? What are the low-hanging, what are the things that I need to make sure I get done? This also is something that I've got a shortcut running for. And so, for instance, this is the window that's just popped up is an application called Raycast, because I know I'll get a question on that. It is OmniFocus forecast. So for instance, I'll pull today's content. What is due in my forecast today? And so it just goes through, puts it on my clipboard. And this is absolutely not accurate, but it's showing, okay, here are the things, it's not accurate because I went through and I stripped out a lot of like the private information in my OmniFocus to be able to do demos for today. But it is accurate for what you'll see in my OmniFocus in terms of my forecast, in terms of what's there and what's left. And as I'm ending my day, like this is just kind of a nice way to go through and make sure, hey, have I missed anything? Is there anything else critical that I'm working on? At the end of the day, I also like to be able to wrap up as part of like closing down my day. What are all the things that I accomplished? What did I tick off? And so I've got another shortcut that I use called completed. And so I'll use completed today. And again, it's just showing what's in my demo vault. But for instance, here are things that I may or may not have gotten done today, but for argument's sake, I did. And the reason why I like doing this is my daily note here winds up being a really nice log. Like not only is it the same note that I go to plan the day, but if I'm looking back or I'm doing searches and I want to be able to search, okay, when was it that I worked on this project or that I talked to this person or like that I followed up on this task? Now I've got, a single point, my Obsidian vault, where I'm able to capture like all of the information that I've done. At the same time, like that search captures things that I've written or, links that I've got between the two. So it's using a tool where you're able to see like these are both views of my day. When you start to look at OmniFocus and Obsidian, it's a way of being able to show, okay, here's two different views of the same kind of window. Got that one done. Two different views of the same window. And it's a way to be able to just, again, here's all the information of your day. How best do you want to be able to view it? In terms of another thing that I do with OmniFocus is I really like to be able to time block when things are getting really busy. So for instance, I can pull up my calendar and I can say, all right, I've got this task, tonight after this call, I want to make sure that I spend the time to go through and work on this thing. And, I've said that it's going to be a 25-minute. This is the joys of doing things on demos. That went to my actual calendar. And I can't show it right now because it's my actual calendar. But the way it works out is that's automatically dropped a link into, I'm going to move it off screen. Maybe I can show it. Hold on. I'm just going to throw that into my demo so that you can see it. What that is that's got, on a calendar event, being able to show, all right, here's this time you need to work on this task. And just quickly, you've got, your task or like your kit of parts already there and together. When you're dealing with a lot of information, a lot of tasks, a lot of things that are potentially like, okay, I've got to act on it. But again, I'm going to get overwhelmed if I've got 35 things showing that I've got to get them done this week in my forecast. For instance, with grad school, I started by putting everything that I had, all the readings that I had, and it could be, 30 plus articles a week where I put them all in my OmniFocus. And I was just getting to the point where, okay, it's too much friction for me because I'm going into my forecast. I'm seeing that big red dot. I know I've got to get these tasks done, But at the end of the day, my task is read for this class, not read these, 36 different articles. And so where that kind of came in for me is, for instance, in OmniFocus, I would start saying, okay, here are my readings for this course. And instead, I would open up, I would sit down, I'd go, okay, here, I'm going to work on this thing, click, and I'd go to my notes. And I would see a view of like the notes that I already have, my literature notes in Obsidian. And this is using a plugin called Kanban. And this way I can see kind of at a quick glance, all right, what am I actually working on? What do I know in my future? Hey, I'm going to have to read these articles. But more importantly, all right, I've finished this article. I'm going to put this into archive. I've got that off my plate. I'm going to move this one into active. I'm going to go through and, hey, I've got a new thing that I've got to be able to read about. Let's just pick one at random. And just being able to pick up from my notes in Obsidian, suddenly I've got a way to, I'm still tracking all the information, everything that I need to get done. But this way, instead, I go straight into a note. And it's reducing that one, like that is additional point of friction where, I've got information, I've got space to be able to start taking notes on something. I've got links to other notes that be able to, provide that information as well. Another way of doing things too is when, it's Obsidian. There are literally 750 plugins. There's probably about 16 ways of doing something. It's about finding the way that makes most sense for you. For you, that note, if you want to keep it simple, it could literally be a note that goes through and says, all right, I want to be able to write on a note on this note that I've got to be able to read. And so suddenly I've got a link to that book. And like you can keep it as simple as that. Or you can use something like data view. You can use something like data view where you start to be able to create automatic ways of having information. So for instance, I am way behind on my blog because everyone keeps asking me to write articles about some of these workflows. And I'm overtaxed at the moment. I've got a few too many things on the go, and I'm going to be kind of fixing that for early next year. But for instance, I've got, here are articles that I've got in progress. I can go through and I can create a new note. Hey, I've got this new idea for a blog, new idea for a blog post. I'm going to use my blog template. I'm going to say, all right, this blog is something that's in progress. Here, now I can just go through and start typing my notes, or more importantly, I can start to create an outline that has that has links to notes that I've taken or ideas that I want to pull in. And suddenly my outline is linked to all of my other notes. But when you start to look at that, maybe that is a priority idea. Like, hey, that's a really good idea. I'm going to pull this over here so we can see them both at the same time. I know that, for instance, I could I could tag it with a priority, and then suddenly it's going to show up. Priority ideas should be showing up. Oh, you know what it is? It's because it's an idea. It's thrown in there. Yeah, here's my idea. It's a priority idea because I literally have it labeled as an idea. So the whole thing is like, hey, here are the things that I'm working on. And I can see, okay, here I've got a whole host of like all the ideas for content that I'm working away at. But at a glance, and just very quickly by saying, all right, this is, an idea. I'm going to go through and I'm going to move this I'm going to actively work on this. And just by moving it to a different folder, it automatically groups it to something where it's in progress. Instead of having, instead of tracking like literally all of these different things within OmniFocus, because they could all, and they used to be all labeled as someday maybe, and then linked back to the node in Obsidian. It's a way of being able to say, okay, I want to be able to, siphon off time in OmniFocus, and I want to be able to say, link to this, work on your blog post. And that might be a recurring task that I put in OmniFocus, but I go through and I just link to this board, and that's where, at least for me, it starts to reduce some of the overwhelm.
It'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about the ideation process, because I know, and I think you've answered this question partially so far, but I know a lot of people, myself included, have a lot of ideas, and they can accumulate this huge mass database of it. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like you're keeping the ideas themselves in Obsidian instead of OmniFocus, which makes a lot of sense. But what would be kind of the mechanism to say, today's the day I'm going to write this blog post, or how would kind of OmniFocus kind of tap you on the shoulder and say, yeah, let's prioritize this?
So that's where something like the shortcut launcher comes in, where I'm like, all right, hey, for instance, on Sunday, I go through and I plan my week, and I start to fit in, okay, what are my major blocks? And now, okay, I do want to be able to get a blog post out this week. Sit here and like as part of my weekly review, I would bring up, okay, my blog articles. And so I bring up literally this note and I go, all right, I would really literally like to get out this article about creating connected tasks between OmniFocus and Obsidian. I'm going to go through and I'm going to turn this into an OmniFocus task. And that's actually, Tim, that's a really good point, because this goes from an idea to an action. Because OmniFocus, again, is a place, at least for me, it's a mindset of, here's an action that really concretely needs to happen. If it's got an assigned due date in OmniFocus, it really needs to happen by this date. For instance, like, let's go through and turn this blog post into a concrete action. So just by turning it, or just by kind of, again, using that shortcut, I can sit here and go, all right, so this is going to be a blog post. And I want to make sure that this is up by, for instance, the one that I'm working on for linking to these shortcuts, I want to actually make sure that's out by tomorrow. So I'm going to say tomorrow at at 7 p.m. And so suddenly now this has gone from an idea to something that's concrete and in like an action that I actually need to take. It's different headspaces. For OmniFocus, it's my promises to myself and to others for, here are the things that I need to get done and the tasks. Whereas something like Obsidian is, here's the workspace where I actually want to be able to do the work. And so like, this is kind of, again, that link between the two. So now when I come tomorrow and, all right, I'm going to work on that blog post, I've got that link and it's opened it automatically when I sit down to write on it. If I want to go that extra step, it's tomorrow morning, I'll go through and actually block out the 45 minutes I need to be able to go through from writing to posting. Or where, like, however much time I think it's going to be able to take for that particular one. So that's kind of the driving force. Is Obsidian is a great idea for working on the ideas, whereas OmniFocus, for me at least, is making sure it's a place for the tasks themselves.
And so just to point to a couple of things you mentioned, it sounds like the weekly review is really an essential part of the system. Otherwise, these things could kind of get lost in ethers. They're not going to be surfaced and turn into actions. Is that the main sort of driver for kind of deciding what to do with your ideas, or might you do it a bit more ad hoc sometimes as you're kind of just browsing through?
Sometimes, like, it really is like, for instance, I want to make sure that I'm working on something, whether or not it's a blog post or I'm going to be connecting with someone on a talk. It's going through and, when the idea hits, you might make that task and just kind of make sure that it's, there, spur of the moment, you're tracking it, boom, got it done, versus that idea to be able to go through and do the planning. Absolutely. There are times where you come across something, you've just read something really interesting, you want to be able to get it out in some way, blog post on Twitter, or I guess Mastodon, which is the place where people are going, it seems to be going now, and act on it. So again, it's a bit of a mix, because like I'm a graphic designer. I do writing. I use Obsidian to be able to manage volunteer work or putting on events. Obsidian's been great for event planning, but it's still, at the end of the day, it all comes down to me for Obsidian to be, my daily note. This home screen for me is, what are the things that I'm logging, keeping notes as I go. Instead of having a scratch pad or a notebook physically on the side, Obsidian has become my notebook. And as I'm actively working through the day, like, I basically live in my forecast screen, or, my different perspectives that I'll have for, hey, am I waiting for content from work? Here are all the projects that I have going for work specifically. What items am I waiting for? A big part of how I work and how I think for both is, you're creating views. What are the views that you need to get things done? Because, if I've got 15-minute window at work, like, I don't necessarily go through and plan, every minute of my day, because, my schedule isn't like that. That's not something that I personally am able to do. But I do want to know, reserve focus time and be able to go through a number of different tasks. Well, sometimes, that is just a generic focus time, and it's opening up, my perspective in OmniFocus and going, okay, here are the calls that I need to make. Here are, what are the status on these things that I've waited for? What are the things that I've delegated and I want to make sure I go through and take a look at? And actually, because a lot of people who use OmniFocus use the getting things done methodology and the idea of waiting for, this is just one thing that I do want to be able to kind of show, is I'm actually transitioning away from tags on this one. I have started to be able to add a text-based thing. Every line that starts with WF and these slashes, I know just from a quick entry standpoint, I'll be on a call or an email, and I'll be able to, trigger my OmniFocus window very quickly. And I just want to be able to just quickly, hey, I'm waiting for from the person an item, and, just dump that very quickly into my inbox. Well, if that gets tagged with, okay, we're going to use, my shortcut key for 30, it's going to be for my client, then suddenly that is automatically visible here that I'm waiting for a person and item. A lot of it comes down to what is easy for quick capture. Reduce friction for when you're getting something into your system, but also reducing friction for when you are wanting to review that information. And how that looks, again, is, I still am using the tag. I haven't weaned myself off of it yet. That's probably in the next month or so, I will just cut that one cold turkey. And it matches the search term waiting for. And I'm using this across the system, because now when I use WF//, I know I've got a search term that I can start to use in email, that I know that I can start to use in Obsidian, in OmniFocus. By doing a search for, WF//, that's suddenly a unique pattern in my notes and in my meeting notes and in my OmniFocus. And I'm using that, you'll see here, FU, which may not sound polite. I may have to rethink that one, but that's meant for follow-up. The idea of okay, here's something I need to follow up on. I also use DEL// for things that are delegated. And again, it's just a way for being able to do these quick capture things and quickly get them into my system that becomes actionable and viewable for me in another way.
A couple of things you've shared there that I think are really key points. One is if something is too tedious to get into your system, the tendency is not to even use the system. Just thinking about what's going to be most attractive when I have something I'm waiting for to get it into the system. And I think one of the other keys that you really demonstrated beautifully about using multiple tools is to keep that consistency, so that your Obsidian and your OmniFocus, they almost look like the same app in some ways. They've got the same names of folders, and it doesn't feel like a total departure from where you were. And then just getting kind of that under your fingers, that's typing, searching for things, whether you're an OmniFocus or Obsidian, you're going to find what you're looking for. So I think those are two excellent practices, and they just make it much more practical to use multiple tools together. Did you ever link from Obsidian to OmniFocus? Do you have Obsidian links?
Yes.
Or OmniFocus links in Obsidian, really?
Absolutely.
Getting my old productivity apps mixed up.
I was going to say, purple and both start with O. It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So this is an example of I've been doing too many things this fall. Is I've got a Kanban going just for here are all the online talks that I'm doing this month. Either I'm organizing or I'm speaking. And so I needed a tool that at a glance, I could see, okay, what am I actively working on? What have I already gotten through? And so each of these, for instance, link directly to an OmniFocus. And so I will show how this looks as a note. It's going through and it's capturing, okay, here's my OmniFocus. And this is using a plugin called Data View, which is terrifying. But once you start using it, start looking for those repeating patterns. Oh my gosh, it's the best thing ever. It creates these wonderful little viewports where you can, leverage information. I will put links for that in this note that I've shared. Essentially what it's going through is it's saying in this note, hey, as an overview, here's your OmniFocus task. Being able to see things at a glance. Okay, here's your OmniFocus project. Well, I know with this project, for instance, I want to go through and I want to make sure that I add data view tasks to note. And so just being able to kind of go through between the two, whether or not it's captured in, kind of an overview window like this, where I've got easy access to all my OmniFocus, and I'm able to visualize, like, this is what I'm missing in OmniFocus. I'm missing a way to be able to take that step backwards and, see that view in kind of like this much more dynamic form. And so using a tool like Obsidian, I was able to kind of create that missing link of what I need for like a visual processing. So for instance, this is effectively now archived. So I've been able to kind of move that over and, finish up these tasks within here. So yes, you can very easily create these links to OmniFocus, because OmniFocus is so robust with all that it offers, that you can kind of create these connections between the two.
If you had a blog post, let's say, were particularly complex and you were going to be spending an hour a day for the next week on it, would that live as a single OmniFocus action that you complete once the blog post is done? Or might you break it down or have it repeating? Or how would you handle something a bit more involved like that?
So if it were, that's where I'd probably want to put it on my calendar. If I knew it was something that I needed to dedicate the time to daily, half an hour a day, an hour a day, whatever I'm working on, that becomes, honestly, at that point, a project. And that's where I'd start to break things down in OmniFocus from a getting things done perspective. So the project would be the blog post. But, my task that I want to do on Monday is go through and do research. The one I want to do on Tuesday, and I start to make those actions the ones that get scheduled or given due dates within OmniFocus. So maybe the blog post itself is, scheduled for Friday, but I've got sub actions underneath for what I need to do. Start to break it down. Again, it's, for me, like I design airports. If I had to say, okay, what are you going to do today? You're going to design an airport, as opposed to here's literally all you need to do today on this airport is design the details on the sign. Just the scale, the overwhelm, the number of like literally thousands of things you need to do across multiple years, it would get overwhelming. So that's where something like OmniFocus becomes really helpful, to be able to, have those things scheduled, broken down. Actually, and also can be really helpful for when things don't go necessarily as planned. This is in one way of, like, I worked on a project that caught on fire once. The job site caught on fire. So I wound up putting that project on hold. And in 18 months, when it was ready again, I took it off of hold. I brought it back into live, production, and came to the meeting prepared. And my project manager was expecting to have to essentially rebrief the entire project and what we needed to do next. And I completely freaked him out, because I'm like, all right, literally, I need to pick up on the following signs. Here's here's where we left off. And that's like a power of OmniFocus, is being able to, put things on hold, defer things. I can't use a task manager that doesn't have deferral dates at this point. So,
and I think the other piece too is that what I've noticed in doing this work over the years is people will tend to overload OmniFocus with a lot of stuff and details, and this is where Obsidian can be this really rich gathering of thoughts and ideas and plans and things like that. And OmniFocus is what the kind of the engine that's making sure that information is put to good use, to kind of paraphrase what you were saying earlier.
Yeah. And one nice thing about Obsidian is, think about it also as a scratch pad. Not every note you make needs to be kept. And sometimes, like, it really does help to just open a blank note and do a brain dump. Here's all the things on my mind, and you just get them off your mind. And then you start to go through afterwards. And, that's where you start to go capture and go, does this live in OmniFocus? Is this something I actually even need to do? Or is this better kept as, a new note that I'll refer to in Obsidian? So it can kind of be what you need it to be. It's not a one size fits all tool. It just literally, you can mold it into whatever you need it to be.
Yeah, totally. And I see people using the OmniFocus inbox to do their brain dumps, and that really clogs up the system, because there might be, a lot of random non-actionable stuff in there, and then it's competing with the, I need to pay my hydro bill by tomorrow, or they're going to cut off my power. So so having a place to keep notes and capture thoughts and so forth, I think, is really an essential part of a productivity system. It's not even an optional part. It's like trying to have a productivity system without a calendar. It's just not going to work. You need a place to store those things. And I think Obsidian, what's powerful about it is it's not just a bunch of notes in isolation. It's the notes that can be connected, even if you don't even know what the connections are when you first create the note. That's getting into the kind of the linking, the thinking sort of idea there. Just going through a few more questions here. There's a question about the sidebar you're using in Obsidian.
With Obsidian, you automatically get, here's your files, all your files, here's your search bar. But then I knew that I needed something, something a little bit different. This is where I think I've been spoiled by OmniFocus. Is I like having that sidebar, that palette, similar to this, where, hey, just as a glance, I've got my working area, and then I've got this beautiful almost palette of things that I can jump to in between. All this is in Obsidian. It's a note. This is just a note that I've gone through and I've dragged over. That was a terrible note to drag over. Here's a note I can drag over. So it's just a note in Obsidian. And so now that I'm able to kind of view it wherever I need, but it's a little bit of a dynamic note. This is using something called, again, it's that plugin called a data view, where I want this to be whatever today's date is. I've got links to, just quickly, my day view for Fantastical. And I've got a link to my OmniFocus forecast. And then here are all the new notes that I created today. Here are notes that I've modified today. And again, this is just using different ways. This is when I talk about how you've got all this information, right? How do you start to create these viewports? Honestly, these are like perspectives. And from using OmniFocus parlance, these are perspectives into different areas of my notes. So I can see at a glance, what's in my inbox, what needs to be processed. What are my utility notes where, for instance, my blog status board is? What are the quick perspectives that I want on my notes and my information in my Obsidian? And all this is creating a note. It's just like any other note in Obsidian.
What's fascinating about this is behind the scene, all you're doing is creating a bunch of text files. So this isn't some proprietary database where you're locked in. You could actually dig into all these notes, even if you weren't using Obsidian. And that's one thing that I think gives it a tremendous amount of portability. Yeah. It's easy to forget that. I think that's essentially all you're doing is manipulating text files. But that's definitely one of what makes it such a powerful and portable solution. If you haven't seen Markdown before, it's a text-based way of expressing formatting and task lists and things like that. Then you could drop this into Drafts or into Craft or whatever app reads it, and you could actually even change it, and those changes would be reflected back into Obsidian. So just a really simple but clever way to use simple text files that have been around for as long as technology's been around, pretty much. There's questions about your daily note. If you were to, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but if you were to mark something complete in OmniFocus, I'm assuming it wouldn't automatically mark complete in Obsidian. This is more about a logging, sort of not about trying to sync up the two systems.
Yeah, for my daily note, it's a log for later. It's the same sort of thing where you can go through and see kind of your completed tasks in OmniFocus or, archive your data. It's just a way of making that visible and searchable for me at a later point. If I'm going through, for instance, this speaking topic, me moving literally this talk that I'm doing right now has no actual impact on OmniFocus. Now, I really look forward to having done this talk. And then in a week from now, someone's just like, oh, I fixed it so that they're linked up between the two. I'm not a programmer. Whoever does that, please reach out to me because I'm going to love this. It's just finding ways to be able to kind of leverage the information. This to me, it's a view. It's a visual view of what are my tasks at hand. This could be sticky notes on a wall. Sticky notes on a wall wouldn't give me this nice link into my OmniFocus.
Question, I noticed that you have 32 items in review. Is this due to items automatically having a default review dates? So I think that's kind of asking what's your sort of your frequency for reviews, and you just stick with the weekly, or do you tend to kind of adjust that?
I tend to I am a big fan of going through and setting different review paces. I have 32 things in review because I'm using a demo vault right now, and things are pretty broken. It's going to, when I restore my actual vault tonight, it's going to be a lot calmer. But I tend to go on a weekly review unless things are truly very hot. That's part of why, I'll sit down with my forecast view in OmniFocus and my daily note in Obsidian. And that's kind of my daily review. I don't get into OmniFocus's set review system. The way I kind of OmniFocus's system is that's my time to be able to sit and think, does this spark any other ideas of what I need to be able to do? It also gives me that chance to be able to set, for instance, I have to renew my passport in 2026. I know this because I set it in, 2016. Literally, I set it in OmniFocus that I need to review my passport and set up an annual review for it. That's a situation where I would just be overwhelmed if I left that on a weekly review cycle. I don't need additional information for it. And if, for instance, my passport gets stolen, that becomes a hot action item in its own other way that I just don't need that pace of review. So keeping, when I check in with that review is as important as when I set those reviews to be.
Yeah, one about getting information out of Obsidian, if you needed to share it with someone through an email or something like that, what would be the mechanism you would use to extract that information?
You can send the Markdown file itself. If it's a person who's not interested in Markdown or like it just doesn't make sense, you can export it as a PDF and send the PDF.
And you moved archived items from Obsidian to DevonThink, or is there a point where things leave your Obsidian and they become archival because maybe they don't necessarily have any future value that you perceive?
So everything in my Obsidian stays in my Obsidian, but I actually also view my Obsidian notes because they're just files on my computer. Literally, these are just files on my computer. I have DevonThink index my files so that suddenly my Obsidian Vault is searchable in DevonThink. So when I'm doing a search for all my general references or whatever I'm looking for, it's able to pick up things in my vault at the same time as it is anything else in my DevonThink or on my computer.
So it might pull something out of a PDF and something out of an Obsidian note in the same search.
Yeah, and it may make connections that I didn't realize were there as well.
Yeah, that's very cool. And the question about when you use Obsidian as a scratch pad, how do you ensure you find and review the brief brain dumps? I find I do this, but I need a good system to review all these notes before I forget I made them. So I think a brain dump can be kind of therapeutic in itself, even if you just throw that information away. But I think you mentioned earlier how it sounds like you take a moment right after the brain dump to kind of mine that and pull out any OmniFocus actions, things like that.
Yeah, I will, at the end of my day, I'll review my actual daily note and just see if there's anything that I need to surface or send somewhere else, if it's archived or it gets created into its own note, or if it's something that I was really fast and I just dumped into my Obsidian and realized, oh, that should have been an OmniFocus task. I take 10 minutes at the end of my day, just go through, make sure everything is cool, and make sure it goes where it needs to be. A brain dump is like, hey, I'm going to sit down. I'm actually going to spend the time and think, and then I'm going to process it probably right there. Yeah,
I think that's the step a lot of people miss. They get really good at capturing things, but then it's important to make a point of doing something with what you captured, even if it's to get rid of it and realize it doesn't have any value. It's a couple of questions to share the sidebar. Is that something that's in a shareable form, like the one where you have the...
It's a Markdown file, so I will make sure make sure it's available. So yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much for that. As Leah mentioned earlier, this is a system that she's built up over time. There's a lot of plugins and complexity. But as she shared, you can start very simply. You could create notes for one area of your life. You could just kind of take maybe some of the complexities out of OmniFocus that don't really belong there and start to build out that part of your life in Obsidian, and then just build it up over time. Don't give yourself a task of duplicating Leah's system in the next week or something like that. Just make it a more organic process, and then that becomes much more sort of doable, approachable than just trying to design a whole airport in one sitting kind of.
Yep, exactly. Yep. I mean, I've been using Obsidian now for over a year and a half. So just like I started off, I'm not a programmer. I started off with one note and started connecting it to other notes and built from there. So it's easy to get overwhelmed. It's so easy to get overwhelmed, but ask yourself, what do I need it to do? What am I actually trying to do with it? And always check back in on that why, just as we do with OmniFocus of why do I have this? Is this something I need to do, want to do, or is it better out of my system?
Yeah, totally. And a year and a half is really not that long a time in the grand scheme of things. So you show what can be created in a relatively short period of time and how you're already, making amazing use of this tool. So I think that might be a good point to call it complete for today. And thank you very much, Leah, for being here today. And I certainly learned a lot, and I'm very curious to dig deeper into Obsidian, and I'm sure many of you are as well. And thanks so much for sharing your your wisdom on both OmniFocus and Obsidian, and I think productivity in general. Because at the end of the day, these are all tools that can take us somewhere in life, and understanding how the tools can be put to good use is really the name of the game.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me, Tim. And thank you for everyone who's been here live, especially in the middle of the night. That's incredible. And thanks to all who are watching. And feel free to ask questions, like reach out to me through my website or through Twitter. And I'm more than happy to share whatever knowledge I've built along the way here with this too.
Okay, thanks again for that. Yeah, thanks to everyone who's here live. Thanks again, Leah, and take care, and I hope to see you all again soon.